There is a lot of conversation surrounding the Baltimore Ravens for many different reasons, and Emmanuel Acho has been involved in some of those conversations, but he finally praised the Ravens. We talk about what he had to say, AFC North teams building up to stop the Ravens, and so much more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Ravens. Welcome into the show. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for being here on this Wednesday, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day. Free and available for you on all podcasting platforms, including in video form on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe to the channel, and in audio form where you can follow along and subscribe as well. 5 days a week for you, plus more here on Locked On Ravens of daily Ravens coverage. And today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Here with me today, Sam Njoku of the Ravens Talk podcast and the Ravens Squad Show. We can officially say that, Sam, if you missed out on the news or missed out on the show. Sam and I and Kadri Ismail, we are now part of the Ravens Squad Show here on Locked On Ravens, where every Monday and Thursday we going live at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. We are the three-man team talking Ravens football on our show too. So we're chopping it up with you, with everybody. And Sam, I thought it went really well yesterday. I had a ton of fun. And hey, we're going to get back at it again on Thursday, but we have lots to talk about today as well, because even though it's a slow part of the offseason, the Ravens and the headlines, that they never sleep.
Yeah, and that hour show, man, it just flew by. It just felt like, we're talking so much Ravens football. I thought, how are we going to squeeze, an hour show together? But man, we were rolling, so that was definitely fun to talk about. Looking forward to the Thursday show as well. Thank you again to all the Ravens fans who tuned in, and hopefully we get some more Ravens fans to tune in again on Thursday, because we got lots and lots to talk about. But you mentioned it, offseason kind of slow, right now. But if you're the Ravens, one of the best teams in the league, people expect you to do well. Definitely a lot of mouths talking about you, and I'm sure the Ravens front office and the execs love to hear that, because that means that football is around the corner and could be looking at some January, February football.
Yeah, you got to hope, especially with this roster. And again, on Locked On Ravens, if you want the regular morning dose of Locked On Ravens, we're here for you Monday through Friday. And then if you want the live version, the squad show, Mondays and Thursdays, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. But you're right, Sam. When you're a good team, people are going to talk about you, and you're going to be a part of a lot of these conversations. And that has been something that's been happening all offseason for the Ravens. And Emmanuel Acho, who, is not necessarily in the best of graces in the Ravens fan base, he's had a lot to say about Lamar Jackson. He's had a lot to say about the Ravens in general, not in the most positive light. Well, surprise for a lot of people here is that he actually gave the Ravens a lot of praise here on the facility. Now, LaShawn McCoy said the Ravens were flawless. And, I don't know if I go as far as LaShawn McCoy in terms of that. I think there are still some certain holes that they could fill here, but they're probably as close to it as you can get in terms of roster construction. Emmanuel Acho then said, quote, "I don't think there's a team roster-wise in the AFC like the Ravens. I don't think the Ravens are missing any pieces from the offensive line perspective. They're stout. Quarterback, MVP, running back, future Hall of Famer, tight ends, next level, defensive line, check, linebackers, top 2 linebacker in all football. Cornerbacks may have the best cornerback tandem, including the nickelback in all football. Safeties, as long as Malaki Starks is who we expect him to be, they have the best safety tandem in football. And at a minimum, they have a top 2 safety in football in Kyle Hamilton." So, man, just keep it coming, Emmanuel Acho. Let's go. This is what I like to hear. And I agree with him, where their roster from top to bottom is absolutely stacked. The one thing he did say is that the only possible missing piece is a number 1 wide receiver. I personally think Zay Flowers is a number 1 wide receiver. I know that's not the national consensus right now, but this is what people are talking about with the Ravens, Sam. They are incredibly stacked. They are a top contender. And, you look up and down that roster. Yeah, it's evident they absolutely are.
Was Acho being held hostage? Blink twice if you need some help. Goodness gracious, did the Ravens fan base have enough of his shenanigans? I've never heard him say one positive thing about the Ravens without a slight but or whatever. So, good to hear from, Acho finally, coming to his senses in regards to the Ravens. I agree with them totally. I think the Ravens have the best roster in the AFC. Certainly one of the two best in the NFL. I think we talk about the Philadelphia Eagles being that other team that has a comparable roster structure. But yeah, best quarterback in the league, check. Even though he said the wide receiver core, needs the number one wide receiver, I still think Zay Flowers is that guy. And I think bringing in other guys like LaJohntay Wester is going to help, alleviate some of the pressure that Zay Flowers had in regards to being that gadget type player as well as being the intermediate route runner. So I think he's going to, improve as a route runner and as a receiver overall as well this year. So, two best tight ends in the game. I mean, Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews, what more can you say? We can go on and on about the cornerback room, yada, yada, yada. The point is, the Ravens roster is the best on paper right now, and there's not too many people, even the biggest haters in the Ravens kingdom, have to admit that the Ravens are, top notch. So it looks good on paper right now. Let's see what happens in training camp. Let's get through to the regular season, and hopefully our thoughts are coming to realization, because again, this roster seems to be top notch.
Yeah, an unreal offseason for Eric DeCosta. The Ravens didn't really lose a bunch, and they gained a lot. I mean, also the fact that they got a lot of these guys on bargain deals, Jaire Alexander, DeAndre Hopkins. I think, Sam, the most controversial deal the Ravens had this offseason was Cooper Rush, which is crazy. I mean, there was crazy stuff being said about that Cooper Rush deal in terms of, too much money for a backup, this, that, and the other. And I'm just, guy, it's a backup quarterback. If Lamar goes down, we know what's about to happen, right? It's not going to be good if he gets lost for the season. But my argument with the backup quarterback quickly is that if Lamar has to miss 8 weeks, I'd rather have a good backup quarterback that can help you go 5-3, 6-2, as opposed to not good backup quarterback to you go 1-7 and Lamar comes back in December and you're out of the hunt. So that's where I am on that. But the point being, the Ravens didn't have any of those big overpays. They didn't have any of those moves where you're scratching your head. Like, was that guy really worth the money? I mean, they bring back Ronnie Stanley, which was, I think, the most important move of the offseason overall. They had to keep Ronnie. That was a massive deal for them. And in terms of Zay being a wide receiver one or not being a wide receiver one, Will Blackman agreed with Acho in terms of them missing a wide receiver one, the Ravens, but he's added that Zay Flowers can be that guy and said that, we're nitpicking trying to find one thing. And LaShawn McCoy made an argument that he said, quote, I think when you have a guy like Derrick Henry, you don't need a number one wide receiver. Like last year, for example, Lamar had a phenomenal year throwing the ball, but Derrick Henry had 1,900 yards. So they threw the ball well and they ran the ball well as a defense. It's hard to really stop this team and defend them. Again, I think Zay is a wide receiver one. I think he has shown that over his first 2 years. I know that the national media might not be as high on Zay Flowers as local media in Baltimore or Ravens fans. I just, part of it might have to do, Sam, with the fact that prototypical number one wide receiver, you get like your 6'2", outside guy, DK Metcalf build, AJ Brown build. Zay's not that guy. And I think people look at his size as a little bit of a smaller guy, speedier, quicker. They're like, oh, that's not what a wide receiver one looks like. A wide receiver one can look like anything, by the way. Cooper Kupp was a wide receiver one for years in Los Angeles. You got, Wes Welker being wide receiver one in New England, Julian Edelman. You have those smaller guys, and even if they are pure slot guys, which Zay Flowers is not, but even if you have a pure slot guy, I don't want to box in guys based off of, their games. If a guy's talented, he's talented, and I think Zay Flowers certainly is a wide receiver one in this league.
Yeah, who's the wide receiver one in Kansas City? Who's the wide receiver one in Buffalo? I think you could comp and say that Zay Flowers and Bateman are a better receiver tandem than the ones that you have there in Buffalo and Kansas City. You don't really need a wide receiver one to win in this league. We've talked about that before. Obviously AJ Brown did his thing over in Philadelphia and helped him get a championship. But you look at the history, the last 10 years, not a lot of dominant wide receivers winning championships. Can you get open? Can you catch the football? Can you be consistent? Those are the three things that require you to be a top-notch receiver in this offense. Obviously, you'd love to have a Jamar Chase or a Justin Jefferson on your football team. But for this roster, you're really just, putting a Ferrari in a snowstorm. It doesn't really add up. Obviously, it'll be perfect. It'll be fun to go around and, swinging in the ice, on the December night. But for real, the Ravens have what they need at receiver. They got Lamar Jackson, which is really what you need to give these receivers open space. And we mentioned Derrick Henry's output as well. I think they're fine at receiver right now. They also have DeAndre Hopkins. I still love that guy. I think he doesn't need to be wide receiver one right now. He doesn't need to be asked to do all these things. He's going to be a problem for the slot cornerback. Good luck. A problem for that second middle linebacker. Good luck containing this guy in the middle of that field. So we'll see what happens. I still think this receiver group is great. Is it the best in the league? No, but doesn't have to be.
I think it's up there. I mean, in terms of receiver groups, I mean, you told me they would have a room like this 5 years ago, Sam, and I'd call you crazy. I'd be like, there's no way. What are you talking about? Or maybe 3 years ago, because I think back 5 years ago, I was still delirious that the Ravens would actually invest in a big wide receiver one type guy. You know, I was AJ Brown, DK Metcalf, come on. You know, that was back in the Julio Jones days. Antonio Brown, man, what a time. What a time. But obviously the Ravens, this to me is honestly how I wanted it to play out. I just didn't expect it to. Where for years, this entire franchise's history, we've been hoping that they would be able to draft and develop at that position. Where they've had the Derrick Masons, the Anquan Boldens, the Steve Smith seniors, vets they have hit on. But I'm glad it went this way. I'm glad that they were able to draft two guys, see the fruits of their scouting and the fruits of their hard work in that department pay off for them. And two guys who have worked really hard to get to the points that they're at. It feels a lot more rewarding than them, I guess, buying a wide receiver one as opposed to them actually doing it themselves. Do you agree with that?
No, I agree perfectly with that. I will say this, that the Ravens have a decision to make sooner rather than later. When Derrick Henry calls it quits or when they move past Derrick Henry, I still think this Ravens offense will be shifting from a 2 tight end to 3 tight end set to more of a 3 wide receiver set where you may need another receiver, somebody who's going to take attention the way that a running game like Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson would. So eventually we may have this conversation where, okay, well, if the Ravens want to be the best offense they can be, yeah, they're going to need a wide receiver, the likes of a Jefferson or a Chase. But right now, with the way this offense is constructed, the magnificent job Eric DeCosta has done drafting these receivers and Zay Flowers and Rashod Bateman. This is as good as it gets. I'm very impressed. I think I've made a living in the past 5 years being critical of the Ravens being unable to get a wide receiver. I think I've made a name for myself as a reporter, being that one guy who's been pounding the table for Eric DeCosta and Ozzie Newsome, to be honest, to make a move like this. The Ravens have finally done that. I'm impressed with it. You're not going to get me talking too much trash about the Ravens being able to do it because they got a stud in Rashod Bateman and an obvious stud in Zay Flowers.
Yeah, they have done what everybody hoped they would do. And it is here. It is reality. And it feels good. I'll tell you, Sam, it feels good that we are in this situation. But coming up in the second part of the show, it also feels good that they have won the division 2 years in a row, the Ravens in the AFC North. And AFC North teams are now building to try to stop the Ravens. We'll talk about why and if it's even going to be successful. All that and more coming up on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. Whether I'm placing the same game parlay or watching a bet right into the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like I'm a part of the action. And look, this is Locked On Ravens, so I am an Orioles guy. The Orioles have not been good whatsoever this season. They have had a lot of injuries. It's been rough. Guys haven't performed up to expectations. And over on FanDuel, Baltimore Orioles World Series odds right now are plus 16,000. So hey, maybe you want to get a little spicy and invest in the Orioles now before the trade deadline. You can, plus 16,000 there is your number. So if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Back on Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher, Sam Njoku, still talking Ravens football with you here on this Wednesday edition of the show. Sam, are AFC North teams scared of the Ravens? It feels like the personnel that some of these teams have drafted in recent seasons, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, for example, and obviously prayers to him. Hopefully he's able to get back in the fold soon for them. But he was a guy, sideline to sideline linebacker. That's the prototypical player you want if you want to try to stop Lamar Jackson. The Steelers signed Patrick Queen away from the Ravens. Obviously someone who does have that sideline to sideline speed as well that we saw when he played in Baltimore. Cincinnati, I don't know what Cincinnati's doing, but they have Trey Hendrickson for now, I guess. So I guess that's a win for them. I guess if they want Geno Stone to try to stop Lamar Jackson, they can try, but I don't think that's going to go very well for them. The spoiler alert there, but it's a difference in where these teams are. Like the Ravens are clear-cut favorites in the North right now. Talk to anybody, that's what you're going to hear. The Steelers, sure, they're going to be a competitive team again. Mike Tomlin always has his guys ready. I think that they have marginally improved this year, despite the fact they have also shipped off talent in the deals they have acquired talent with. But I think that you're seeing teams build up to try to beat the Ravens, whereas the Ravens are just on a different step than they are, right? All these other AFC North teams are down at hey, we want to try to catch Baltimore. Well, Baltimore's trying to win a Super Bowl, right? They're a step ahead of those AFC North teams. So what do you think about the way the offseason has gone, and particularly you have the 3 division rivals for Baltimore in the first round of this draft taking defensive linemen. The Browns with Mason Graham, the Bengals with Shamar Stewart, and the Steelers with Derrick Harmon. I think that sent a clear message about what these teams are thinking about in terms of how they need to get back on track, particularly in the division. So that's where I am with it.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. The Ravens were in a similar situation with the Pittsburgh Steelers way back when. I think after they lost in the AFC Championship in 2008, Ozzie Newsome and Eric DeCosta made it very clear that they were going to do their best to try and beat the Pittsburgh Steelers because that was the only way they were going to get over the hump and reach that Super Bowl, which they did 4 years later. So I think these other teams are starting to, understand that. They don't want to completely reconstruct their defense because to truly beat the Ravens, you really need to focus in so many things to try and stop the Ravens. And the Browns, I think, did the best job of that with JOK, getting a guy like that who can possibly come in and move sideline to sideline and be that guy in the passing game as well if the Ravens do, in fact, do that mesh point where they have Lamar Jackson keep the football. But other than that, it's really hard to construct your team to stop the Ravens. That's why they've been so successful since Lamar Jackson entered the league. But yeah, I think these teams understand that you got to get after the quarterback. You got to be multifaceted. You have to have these tweeners at defensive line to really be that guy that could stop on dime and contain Lamar Jackson as well as, contain Derrick Henry. So that's a lot to ask for. I mean, just that sentence is crazy. Contain Lamar and contain Derrick Henry at the same time. That's insane. So I feel bad for the defensive coordinators a little bit. But when it's all said and done, the only way to beat, the Ravens, the only way to get to the AFC North title is to beat the Ravens. And to do that, you need to construct it through the draft. And now we're in a situation where the Ravens have won it 2 times in a row now. No team in the history of the division have won the AFC North 3 times in a row. The Ravens have a decent shot, a more than decent shot, to do it this year. So it's going to be interesting what these teams do to try and combat that. We talked about the Bengals. I mean, you got to be physical to beat the Ravens. I mean, there's just no way about it. The Bengals don't have the roster, don't have the talent to do it. The Browns are an interesting enigma, but they still seem like they're in disarray with their whole situation. So I try not to put too much thought into it. But the Pittsburgh Steelers, the defensive front rivals that of the Philadelphia Eagles, they do have the front to get the job done. Whether or not they're able to sign TJ Watt remains to be seen, but that's their only saving grace. That secondary, even though they added, Slay and others and Jalen Ramsey, they lost Lincoln Fitzpatrick. That's huge. You need a safety up top to really contain these receivers when they're blown by you, when they fake you with the play action. So good luck. So all those things really play a factor. Still think the Steelers have the best chance to do it if they do get it done. But the Ravens are still by far the best team in this division.
Yeah, I mean, I know we've had the conversation a ton, Sam, you and I, just about, biggest threats to the Ravens in the division and this, that, and the other. But what do you think it's going to come down to when these teams actually play the Ravens this year? Steelers, Browns, Bengals. We know that AFC North games are no joke. We know that sometimes random weird games will happen, like the Browns game last year with Jameis Winston, or that Steelers game early where Derrick Henry has the fumble early and, Justin Tucker missed a bajillion field goals in that game. And then you get the Ravens coming out on the other side of them in Cincinnati 2 times when they really shouldn't have won either of those games, but somehow they did. And that was a wake-up call. But do you expect it to be more dominating for the Ravens, more like what we saw the last 2 times the Ravens played Pittsburgh and then the Cleveland game in Week 18? Or do you think that these games are always just going to be close and that's the nature of the division?
I think it's going to be bad this year for other teams. I mean, I'm trying my best to remain pessimistic, but the roster's the roster, and I'm just trying to use what I learned from last year and compute where these new talented guys like Jaire Alexander, Malaki Starks, DeAndre Hopkins, all of the things that the Ravens did poorly last year, they're equipped to handle this year. The only issue the Ravens have is with the interior of that offensive line during passing downs when they're down, 3rd and 9, 3rd and 8. Do we trust Falele and Voorhees to stand pat and get, Jackson enough time to make those passes? That's the only negative I see with this football team. I think it's going to be very tough for these teams. We saw what happened with the Steelers and Ravens in the wild card round in the playoffs. And a lot of things, that game was a blowout. I mean, George Pickens went crazy against, Brandon Stevens, who's no longer on this team. Other than that, the Ravens dominated the Steelers. And I expect more of that this year. Their only saving grace is a 40-year-old quarterback trying to get some limelight in his last year in the league. That's the only way that they have a shot with it. And the Bengals, again, we mentioned it, they took advantage of a defensive backfield that was in disarray. That's not the case this year. And the Browns are the Browns. So I just don't see it being that type of game. I think the week 1 matchup with the Bills will be very telling. It could be one of those situations where if they win by more than a touchdown, that could be the momentum they need to push them 17 weeks, 18 weeks into the postseason. So I'm very excited for the start of the season. It'll tell us a lot about this team, but as far as this division is concerned, I don't see this being a situation where, unless there's turnovers and missed field goals aplenty, like that matchup with the Steelers, it's going to be a very dominating season for the Ravens if they stay healthy.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I have no confidence in Cincinnati beating the Ravens this year. I'm very low on them. I just don't think they did enough. They kept their stars. That's a push. I mean, they had those guys last year. I mean, they didn't do anything to upgrade their roster, in my opinion. And who knows, by the time we're talking in week 1, Sam, they may have lost Trey Hendrickson, or maybe Shamar Stewart has not agreed to a contract and he's still on the outs with them. So that team aside, I guess if the Ravens don't show up to one of those games against Cleveland, it can get weird, but Jameis Winston isn't walking through that door, and he had a game of all games in that one. I mean, Myles Garrett is always going to be an issue, and those matchups are going to be fun with, him and Ronnie Stanley and Roger Rosengarten, but I'm not there. And then, Pittsburgh games I just think get weird, but I think we're seeing almost a shift where Pittsburgh had Baltimore's number. Like, that was the thing where there was, it's not a rivalry. Pittsburgh always beats the Ravens, Well, what we saw at the end of last season, you mentioned it, especially in the wild card game, like that. I think that's shifting here with what could be the norm, at least for this upcoming season. I'm not discounting, and I'm not saying, the Ravens are going to go 6-0 in the division, book it right now. I'd be very foolish to say that because the games are not played on paper. They are played on the field, but there are other things you can look at to give you an inkling of what could happen here. And I just think the Ravens defensive line is too quick for a lot of these offensive lines. I think the secondary, the Ravens have built, because it's not just the Bengals that have that star-studded wide receiver duo. I think the Bengals duo is the one that you look to, but there are a lot of other teams you got to worry about with, like the wide receiver trio in Kansas City, or, Buffalo adding in guys, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle in Miami. Like, you have a lot of wide receiver duos. So, you could argue, the Ravens are adding all these corners for the Bengals. No, I just think they're adding all those corners because the NFL has a lot of talented receivers, and you can never have enough cornerbacks as well, by the way. But that's what I think it is, Sam. The Ravens right now are in a really good spot in that division. And, you mentioned it. No team has won the division 3 years in a row. We talked about that yesterday, or I guess now 2 days ago on the squad show. I think the Ravens have a really good shot to do it this year, and I would not be shocked if it happens. I mean, right now, they're not overwhelmingly the favorites, but they're kind of overwhelmingly the favorites.
Exactly. They're just a team to beat in the AFC North, and I see them having the same type of success the Eagles did last year. And I think the difference between the Eagles and the Ravens is that they have a better quarterback, a way better quarterback, in Lamar Jackson, and that's going to be the push. That's going to be what's going to push this team over the edge. As you mentioned, they do have lulls. John Harbaugh, every once in a while, this team doesn't seem like they're ready to go. So maybe expect 1 or 2 games like that. Hopefully it's not divisional matchups, and so maybe John Harbaugh gets it around this year. A lot of maybes. That's the fun of the regular season. We don't really know what's going to happen until it happens. But on paper is what we can talk about, and it's looking like this is the best Ravens team we've seen in a long, long time. That gets Ravens fans excited. It certainly gets me and you excited. So let's see what happens.
I'm going to give you a spoiler alert right here, Sam. The Ravens are probably not going 17-0.
Oh,
I'm just gonna say it. I'm just gonna say it, right? Oh. But that doesn't mean they're not a good team. All right. Yeah. I know 17-0 dream is always fun until it's gone. And last year it was gone in a hurry. I'll tell you that. But the Ravens were able to bounce back, and I give them a lot of credit for bouncing back from 0-2 the way that they did. And I will never forget that fourth quarter against Dallas where they almost, they almost threw that thing away. And then we'd be having a lot different conversations maybe, but they were able to get back on track in a really dominant way. And while every game wasn't pretty, and they certainly still had those frustrating losses after starting 0-2, I've come to expect them to be a great regular season team. It's no secret, Sam. The conversation is the playoffs, and that's what they need to do to fully get over that hump. But coming up, Ravens have a lot of talented players, and the NFL Top 100 is now releasing. It's dropping, and we're not going to get from players 10-1 for a while, but no Ravens currently at the time of this recording have been added onto that list. So Sam and I will talk about who we think should be on the list based off of last year and what it could mean if a guy is snubbed from a certain position. All that and more coming up on Locked On Ravens. Back on Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher, Sam Njoku, talking Ravens football here on Locked On Ravens. We got you covered here 5 days a week on Locked On Ravens with that daily Ravens coverage. 6 a.m. Eastern time is the main show. And then, of course, we had it on the Ravens Squad Show, which is live Mondays and Thursdays at 7:30. It is Sam, it is myself, and it is former Ravens receiver Kadri Ismail. So if you want to chop it up with us for an hour talking Ravens on Mondays and Thursdays, we got you covered over here on Locked On Ravens and, of course, the Ravens Squad Show. But, Sam, the NFL Top 100 is always so intriguing. Obviously, it's voted on by the players, and there are a lot of names that are put in a lot of spots that fans are never happy with, right? Everybody wants their guy to be number one. Everybody wants their guy to be rated really highly. Some guys get snubbed, and it always is what it is. But currently, at the time of this recording, the NFL, it's been released 100 through 87, and no Ravens have been added onto that list. Now, I'm just going to get this out of the way right now. Lamar Jackson should be number one on this list. He should be. Josh Allen MVP and all. Lamar Jackson was the best player in football last season. Lamar Jackson should be the number one player on this list. I'm sure there'll be votes for Josh Allen. I'm sure there'll be votes for others as well. But, between Lamar, Josh, and Saquon Barkley, I'm sure is the third guy. Maybe Derrick Henry gets some votes. I say Lamar Jackson should be the best player on this list because, well, guess what? He was the best player in football last season. And Josh Allen had a great year. But that doesn't take away from the historic season that is being swept under the rug that Lamar Jackson had because he did not have any hardware to show for it.
It is very clear that Lamar Jackson should be number one, and I wish there was a betting line for it. Let's check FanDuel out and see what happens. He should definitely be the number one player. It makes no sense why he wasn't the MVP. We can go on and on about it. I guess it's just the voters who decided it, but the players decide this, if I'm not mistaken, and It's very clear that the players are siding with Lamar Jackson being the best player in the league. And it's not a popularity contest. It kind of is a little bit, but when it's all said and done, you got to go with what you know, and the players know better than anybody who played the best because they played the best. And Lamar Jackson is definitely going to be number one, I'm pretty sure, much to the chagrin of guys like Acho, we talked about earlier in the show. But I think he's going to be the number one guy. Josh Allen likely number two, maybe even number three. A lot of votes will probably be going Saquon Barkley's way. I think it's going to be a safe bet for that, and it should be. And if it's not, it's going to be a very interesting day in social media with a lot of fan bases, particularly one between two teams that are playing each other on Sunday night in Week 1.
Oh, I know that this Ravens fan base would go crazy, much like it. I remember that MVP day too, where I think Lamar, like the odds were changing so much over the course of the day. And you're like, oh, Lamar, Josh, Lamar. And then, what happened. And again, it's not taking away from what Josh did last season. He had a great year and he's an awesome quarterback. I have a lot of respect for Josh Allen, but, I think Lamar not winning MVP or Offensive Player of the Year, and I think everybody kind of understood that Saquon was going to win Offensive Player of the Year. So whichever one of those quarterbacks didn't win the MVP, their season was going to get swept under the rug. Lamar Jackson, 4 interceptions last year, 40 touchdowns, over 40 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. You won't hear a peep about it, which is just extremely unfortunate. But Sam, it's not all about Lamar Jackson. Obviously, the Ravens have a lot of other talented players. I would expect Derrick Henry to get some top 10 votes. I think he should finish in the top 10 of players in the top 100. You also have guys like Kyle Hamilton, Marlon Humphrey had a great bounce back year. Who else is going to be on this list from the Baltimore's perspective, in your opinion? Because I think there are a lot of names that can make it.
Yeah, I think Kyle Hamilton is pretty much a shoo-in. He's the best safety in all of football, in my opinion. Certainly the best player in the NFL under the age of 25, in my opinion. I think it's just a shoo-in that he gets it. Marlon Humphrey could make it. He had a sneaky good season. Roquan Smith, the name and the pedigree that he had in his previous seasons. He didn't have statistically the best season last year, but I think overall he played way better and he got put in a lot of situations on the field that he probably shouldn't have been. Not really his fault what happened, but I think that he played pretty darn good football as well. Let's see. Did I mention Mark Andrews? Mark Andrews, I think, should be it. Isaiah Likely, if they're smart, should be in it, but we're getting near the point where, if he hasn't been selected yet, it's going to be pretty tough to convince me that he's going to be in that situation as well. I think that's, unless I'm missing somebody, I think that's a pretty decent outing. Ronnie Stanley maybe. Derrick Henry, I think we talked about that. Obviously, Derrick Henry's going to get in. And I think that's pretty much where we go with it for now.
I could see Linderbaum getting in. I think – No, you're good. I think Linderbaum definitely should be in there. Here's one that's intriguing. Zay Flowers had over 1,000 yards last season. He made the Pro Bowl. I think what might deter him is he only had 4 touchdowns last year. I think that's probably where, like, if he had 7 or 8, like if he had a Bateman year in terms of touchdowns, maybe you're talking about Zay Flowers. They're already at 87. I could see him maybe like top 7, like up to 75. And then I think at that point, he probably doesn't make it. But I wouldn't be shocked if he didn't make it, that he was one of those like first ones out. Do you see it that way?
Yeah, I do see it that way. I think Zay Flowers had a masterful season last year. I think we kind of underestimated his value in the team when he went injured in that Browns game. We thought, the Ravens are a running football team. They can just get by without him. And you could see the difference on the field with Zay Flowers and without him. Kind of similar to the Eagles game where Rashod Bateman went down. Sure. We could see how this offense looked without those guys. So I think Zay Flowers definitely might have been the first guy out type of deal. But, unfortunate. I think he had the chance to build upon this performance. We now know him as Pro Bowl Zay. So I think he has that pedigree and he has that ability to kind of build upon his resume in 2025. He's going to have to share the ball a lot with, DeAndre Hopkins is on the field now, along with Bateman, and I like Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews. So a lot more mouths to feed, but I think Zay Flowers is still that number one target the defense is going to be looking at. And he could, potentially be in that conversation for top 100 in 2026.
Roquan Smith was the 19th best player on this list in 2024. 19th best player. I think he sneaks on here. I know it wasn't the Roquan Smith year, right, that everybody thought. Like, Roquan, to me, I think a lot of people look at the first half of the year for Roquan, right? Wasn't wonderful for Roquan, at least up to Roquan Smith's standards, right? I think week 1 against Kansas City, he was getting torched. He had a lot on his plate. Second half of the season, he was awesome. I mean, Roquan, to me, is a guy that, I think he probably breaks like top 40, maybe even top 30. I'll stick with it. I think top 40 is probably where I'd go for Roquan. What about Odafe Owe? Look, double-digit sacks, I think, puts you in the conversation, and that's why I'm putting him on here. Do I think he'll get on the list? No, I don't think he'll get on the list. But I think it might be similar to Zay Flowers, where, maybe he was one of the last ones voted out in this. I mean, he only had 39 tackles, 10 sacks. It's not enough, in my opinion, to make the list, but it's encouraging for what he could do next year, I think is what I'll say for that.
Yeah, I think that he has a chance to make it next year. Again, those double-digit sacks are always a plus, but it's just, as you mentioned it a lot this offseason, not consistent enough. I mean, one game he'll have 3 sacks, the next minute he'll be totally phased out the game. Unfortunately, that doesn't bode well for you in the eyes of the voters. Another guy, Nnamdi Madubuike, on film, he's really good. And I think that people are looking at the sack total diminish and think, he doesn't have it anymore. Teams are double teaming and triple teaming this guy every single snap. That's why we love Travis Jones so much. That's why a lot of fans in the fan base wanted another interior lineman to kind of give him some relief. He is a guy who, if you're playing next to him, you understand how much of a beast he is, but maybe, on paper and, the stat sheet and maybe watching on TV, you think he had a diminished year. But I think Nnamdi Madubuike continues to be that top-notch interior defensive lineman, and he may sneak on the list. You never know.
Yeah, I think it's definitely possible. We will see how it all unfolds, though. Sam, I appreciate you popping on with me. Before you head out of here, tell people where they can find you and what you're working on as we just creep closer and closer to training camp.
Oh, yeah. You can find me on Raven Stock Podcast on Instagram and Twitter. And right now we're working on the Raven Squad show that I'm very excited about. Love talking about it. Talked about it all day. Past 2 days, it's all been on my mind. Raven Squad show, how to get you guys some more content. So very much looking forward to talking to you guys on Thursday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time as we do creep ever so slowly, but, also swiftly towards training camp.
Yep. Mondays and Thursdays is when the squad show happens, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And, of course, the main Locked On Ravens show, which this is Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. Eastern Time. So we have so much Ravens content for you on Locked On Ravens. You do not want to miss it. All the links to Sam's work in the description down below. Sam, I appreciate you popping on with me here, and I'll see you on Thursday. Appreciate you, and thank you to everybody who watched and listened to Locked On Ravens today. Coming up tomorrow, more Ravens content here on Locked On Ravens. So be sure to stay tuned, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.